got a few speakers here tonight.
You're not. Yeah. Oh, but don't fall on the other one.
Is this any?
Yes.
Is this any better?
Yes.
How's this? Once again, we'd like to welcome everybody here to the talk on the Seal Island Lake. We've got a few speakers this evening, and hopefully something can be done down the road. But once again, thank you for everybody coming. Looks like a nice crowd. And at this point, we'll get things started.
Actually, what is technology? Can everyone hear me okay? Turn it up. Or maybe I should just think closer. I'm not sure what this device is. I'm not familiar with this. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Please bear with me. I'm not used to addressing such crowds. Good evening, gentle people. For those that I have not met yet, my name is Mary Hichens. I am the daughter of Reverend Thomas and Mrs. Elizabeth Doan Kroll of Barrington, and I'm the wife of Captain Richard Hichens of Penzance, England. I'm here to speak to you about the establishment of the Seal Island Lighthouse, which I am to understand is now the oldest wooden lighthouse in Nova Scotia and in grave danger of being lost. This pains me greatly as my husband and I have worked so diligently to see it constructed. As a girl, I would have vivid night terrors about men being shipwrecked and perishing due to exposure. These experiences would play an important role in my life. In January of 1817, a violent storm had raged for days, and I wakened early in the morning after a night of wild dreams where I had envisioned a helpless ship being tossed about on the waves, its crew working so hard to keep her afloat. In horror, I reached out to help them, but they were out of my arm's reach. "Swim for the shore," I cried. Hearing this, my parents rushed to my room and tried to comfort me. Father assured me that he would find out if any wreck had occurred. He returned at noon the next day to inform us that there had indeed been a wreck and that all hands had been rescued from Cape Sable. After the crew had been processed through the notary public, they were sent to families to be cared for, and young Captain Richard Hichens of the brig the Friendship, wrecked the day prior off Cape Sable, would board with our family. In February of 1820, we were married and began to start a family. I revealed to Richard that I had suffered with these terrible these dreams of shipwrecked souls perishing on the shore for years. In January of 1823, I woke my husband screaming to help this man that had been freezing to death. Richard remembered how clearly I had been alerted in my dreams of his shipwreck. Spring arrived, and word returned that after a visit to Seal Island, they had found a shipwrecked man frozen with a tinderbox, flint and steel in his hands, trying to light a fire. That steeled my decision to act, and I proposed to my husband that we move to Seal Island and set up a life-saving station of sorts. Our family, along with two other families, Jerusha and my brother Edmund Kroll, and Jerusha's brother John Nickerson and his wife, started our preparations for the move, and we prepared accommodations on the island. We brought a dozen hens and a cow with many donations of food and supplies from the community. We would build 2 homes with windows to be lit with candles as a guiding light for anyone that reached the shores of the island. I recall Jerusha saying to me, "There will be scarcely enough room for us on the boat." We traveled 20 miles across the ocean to reach the island that would become our home. From the north side, we could warn ships away from Devil's Limb, and from the other shoals, and also see a glow on the east shore. I recall a harrowing moment in November when Richard and I returned to Barrington for a few days for the birth of our child. The Krolls, knowing that supplies would be needed to last out the winter, reluctantly left their 3 children, the oldest aged 12 and the youngest aged 7, with a promise to return the next day. However, a storm would blow up, and the Krolls were unable to leave the mainland for the island until early April. They expected to find their children frozen to death or having died from starvation. but happily the children had survived. They'd fed themselves, kept the fire and the candles burning, although they were a little more slight when they found them, thankfully alive. It was the light from our home that the crew of the Vivid saw when they had run aground on Race Point at the northern end of the island. At night and in the blinding snow, the half-frozen sailors crawled through the scrub trees for shelter and saw the light streaming from the Kroll home. Edmund signaled to us on the east side, and the men went out to retrieve the remaining crew and bring them to Jerusha and myself to revive them. Eventually, I pushed for my husband to petition the Legislative Assembly of Nova Scotia to fund a wharf, life-saving station, and later a lighthouse to be constructed on the island. During this time, we endured the loss of 2 young children. We have helped with many rescues, such as the Vulcan, in which all hands were saved due to our efforts, and careful recording of the large number of wrecks at Seal Island, and through the persuasion of the Governor of Nova Scotia by me, the government agreed to erect a lighthouse. After a visit to Seal Island in 1857, when Richard was still keeper, William Condon, superintendent of the Board of Works, wrote, "I have heard several complaints of this lighthouse not being as useful as it might be on account of the light exhibited being very poor. I did not see any apparent neglect on the part of the keeper during my visit of inspection, and I am inclined to think that here, as at Shelburne, the principal fault is with the lamps in use, and I am strengthened in this opinion from my own observation of the light, which even at an early period of the night did not exhibit that brilliancy desirable, and which is expected from a lighthouse so important in position as that of Seal Island, and where so many lamps are in use. As half of the expense of this establishment is borne by New Brunswick, care should be taken that there be no cause of complaint against this lighthouse on the ground of want of proper lamps. I would therefore recommend that the present old lamps be replaced by new ones early next season. The new lamps to be fewer in number but more effective in power and brilliancy. There is scarcely a more important light on our coast than this one at Seal Island, and I will do all in my power to make it as effective as possible early next season." I've jumped ahead of myself because I failed to mention that the lighthouse itself was first lit on November 28, 1831, and that happened to be the same day that I gave birth to our daughter Sarah in the builder's cottage nearby. She was the first baby to be born alive on our beloved island. Richard would keep this light until 1855. Seal Island Lighthouse was the 8th lighthouse built by the government of Nova Scotia. It was a stone and mortar foundation, laid first to support the wooden octagonal tower that has massive 47-foot long and 16-inch square timbers at each of the 8 corners. The tower has a diameter of 30.5 feet at the base and tapers to 13.5 at the gallery. From base to vane, the lighthouse, which was originally painted white, stands 60 feet tall. The lantern room floor was supported by heavy wood knees, while stout cross members braced the wall of the tower. To assist mariners during periods of fog, a bell was placed at the station in 1832. After the arrival of myself and the others on Seal Island, and with an average of 1 shipwreck per week, not 1 shipwrecked soul died after reaching the island and would perish because assistance was not at hand. Thank you for allowing me to address you this evening.
Great job, Sam or Mary, whoever you are. Well, at this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Chris Mills. He's a former light keeper on this Seal Island. He'll do a small presentation.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Good. So I don't get the room darkened, right? You're in the headlights. Well, my name is Chris Mills, and I'm a recovering lighthouse keeper. But you know, it's an affliction I don't think I ever want to recover from, because I think the best 9 years of my working career were as a lighthouse keeper. Not all of them were on Seal Island. For those of you who don't know me, and by the way, thank you, Mary Hichens, Sam/Mary, excellent job. And Mary Hichens really is the reason, indirectly and directly, that we're all here tonight, because without Mary Hichens there would be no Seal Island Lighthouse, and obviously there's a lot of support for Seal Island Lighthouse, so thank you very much. I became a lighthouse keeper in 1989, Cross Island off of Lunenburg, excuse me. I've worked in Lewisburg, so I was getting that mixed up. Seal Island was my second lighthouse, and I was fortunate enough to be there for a year and got to know the island that I've been visiting since I was 7 or 8 years old. We own a part owner of the North Home out there. So I've been going there for a long time, and it was a real honor and a thrill to work as a lighthouse keeper on Seal Island and to get to know a bit of the rhythm of the island. Instead of going out for a weekend with my family or a week or 2 weeks, I was out there for a month at a time, so I got to work with the famous Jim Nickerson. I got to work with the famous Brian Stoddard. I got to know Ray Tyner, who was there in the 80s. I got to know about Bradford Fleming, whose grandson is here tonight, and who's going to share some stories with you a little bit later. And then I went on to British Columbia and some other lakes and blah, 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 which were all wonderful. But Seal Island has really stuck with me, not only because of the association I've had with the island over the years, but you get a sense of how this is a part of the very fabric of this part of the province. It's just, and how many of you have been to the island? Raise a hand. Okay, boy, very impressive. And if you haven't, you probably want to go. Islands are funny. You either love them or you don't. There's not a lot of in between. If you've been to Seal Island and you like it, you don't like it, you love it. And if you're kind of in between about it, talk to me later, because yeah. The connection to this island, with all this area, with all the people, some of you are in this room right now, not only lighthouse keepers, but the lifeboat crew who worked on the island for close to a century, fishers who fished around the island, who settled on the island. These connections run deep to this very day, and you can see that connection with the people who return to the island. It's also a story of death and destruction, and that's what brought all of us together in a very strange way. And also the story of how important women were in the development of aids to navigation, not only in Canada, but around the world. You may have heard of Grace Darling, who saved people in northern England, Ida Lewis, Lime Rock in the Rhode Island area, and Mary Hichens, who didn't necessarily grab people directly out of the water, but what she strove for ended up saving countless numbers of ships, and of course, ships carry people. That's what's important. Evelyn Richardson, some of whose family members are here tonight, wrote about the wicked elbow of the Bay of Fundy, and that's where Seal Island is, down at that wicked elbow. And if you can place yourself 200 years ago or more now, an uninhabited island, wicked tides, you know what the fog is like if you fished around there. There's limb and ledge, so devil's limb, limb's limb, blonde rock. It's just a tale of death and destruction. Winifred Hamilton, who was descended from the long line of lightkeepers and first settlers of that island, compiled a list of shipwrecks. Her list begins in 1778 and wraps up in 1944, 150. Those are the ones that are recorded. The number could be double. Before anyone lived on the island, before Mary and her people, wherever you are now, Mary, it was a really grim task every spring to get people out to the island to see, basically take a tally of who had passed. And there was a lay preacher named Calvin Can, and also Thomas Kroll from Cape Island. And you may have heard the story that on one occasion, one spring, they found 21 bodies and buried them in a single day. The other story that gets recounted quite a bit is the person who was found crouched over a fire trying to light, a pile of wood trying to light a fire with a flint or a stone or something, and was obviously dead because there was no help. So, Richard Hichens, born in Cornwall, I think Penzance, he was wrecked himself on the Cape itself, Cape Sable, winter of 1816-17 in a wicked, wicked storm. Apparently Thomas Kroll was also a notary, as well as being a preacher, lived somewhere around where the causeway is now, I believe. And when Richard went to Tommy Kroll's home to enter his protest about the shipwreck, the protest being his account of the shipwreck, he no doubt set eyes on the young Mary. And the story goes that Mary, when she heard the handsome sailor's man, she said, "Hitchens, oh, what a name." And I mean, it's a great name. I didn't think it was that amazing, but she was quite impressed with the name, and in due time she became Mrs. Richard Hichens, or Mary Hichens. She really thought this was an issue. They had to get people out there to save people who were washed ashore on this island. So this became her lot in life. The families went out, and as Evelyn Richardson writes in B Was for Butter, a book that's out of print now, but a fantastic read, There's a chapter on Seal Island, and the story goes that she persuaded her husband to go out and set up some sort of domicile on the island so that people could be helped to wash ashore. And he said, well, won't you miss me? And she said, well, I ain't gonna miss you because I'm coming out with you. And he said, no, no, no. And she said, oh yes. And this is the story goes. So they settled on the island with Edmund and Jerusha Kroll, as Mary has already, Sam, excuse me, has already told us. When they did that, immediately things changed, because not one single person in the 100 years that the Hichens and Krolls and their descendants were on the island, not one person died on that island. Now, there were still deaths from shipwrecks, but not on that island. Anyone who got ashore survived. They initially set up homes on the east and west sides of the island, and they kept candles burning, as the story goes, in the gable end windows, so that each family would know, oh, everything was okay with the other, and also as a guiding light. This is before the lighthouse, for anyone who might be washed ashore. And to this day, at North Home, when I go up to bed at night in the gable end facing the east side, I put a little light on, and I can usually see the lights over at the east side, just as a little homage to Mary and the families. You have to realize that this was like the hinterland back then, so the families did everything on their own. They did not have a lifeboat provided to them. They had no pay for what they were doing initially. They constructed their own wharf, although they finally did get funds from the government for that. And by the time Richard became a lightkeeper and Edmund Kroll, they took it in turns for 6 months at a time. He was making £30 a year. I did some calculations with the help of a search engine, so that's about 4,300 quid or pounds in 2024, $7,800 Canadian a year to work on Seal Island. I mean, I do it for free, but nowadays it's different. Also, the Royal Humane Society in England donated some life preservers for the crew. So this is very much a cobbled together affair until Mary said, we need a lighthouse. And I'll get to that in a sec. At the Public Archives of Nova Scotia, there's some really neat documentation, and there is a list of vessels shipwrecked on the Great Seal Island and its vicinity since commencement of 1822, being the year it was granted and settled by Richard Hichens and Edmund Kroll. Vulcan, Master Hume, 27 saved. And then in the language of the day, again, our limits are too contracted, meaning there's not enough space to give you all the detail of what went on. The crew and passengers of this ship, when towed to shore, and Hichens and Kroll in a whaleboat, by what means their lives were prolonged, among the latter were Major Wardrobe and others of His Majesty's 81 Regiment afoot, and remained on the island for 16 days before opportunity offered to carry them to the Main. So they're not only saving people, they're housing them, they're feeding them, they're treating whatever injuries they had. I'll read you one more. Vessel Ardent, Master Sewell or Soul, all lost, carrying 1,500 barrels of flour. This vessel drifted on shore on the long bar at the southern end of the island, so that would be what they call the bar or Mother Owens Point, near where the lighthouse now stands, and went all to pieces, drifted across the bar with an easterly gale, and of course, with the exception of barrels of flour, some fragments of sails, went all to sea. A sheet of paper would not be sufficient to make the requisite remarks. To see that, and the bodies that would have been washed ashore would have been just horrible, but that's the way things were then. So legend and popular culture and the ghost of Mary Hichens have let us know that the lighthouse was basically the next logical step in keeping shipping, which was increasing all the time. You have to remember that this shipping was going up the Bay of Fundy to St. John as well. It wasn't just, I don't mean just, but it wasn't just local fishing vessels from Cape Island and Yarmouth. This was a big deal. This was a lighthouse of regional, if not national, importance. So they petitioned the government, and the Lieutenant Governor, Sir James Kemp, visited the island before 1831. He was a fellow who liked to get around. Apparently he was a snappy dresser, and he was probably quite taken with Mary. And the petition was successful, and the House of Assembly voted £1,000 for construction of the lighthouse, of which, after some back and forth, New Brunswick agreed to pay half of, which made full sense because there was so much shipping going up to St. John and other New Brunswick ports. So they began the construction of the tower, and Mary Hichens, the ghost of Mary Hichens, has already told us about the 47-foot beams, which are all still there and all very much solid. They're literally like this far around. I don't know how they stood them up, but I do know that they came to the island by some sort of sailing vessel. They were landed on the west side and they were hauled right across the island on what's still known today, with some older folks anyway, as Cameron's Road. It's probably all grown in now, but they were actually hauled across with horses, or oxen or something similar, and stood up somehow, and this massive colonial structure was built. Richard Hichens and Edmund Kroll were the first keepers, 6 months at a time, as I say, and as we've just found out, a daughter was born to Richard and to Mary the night the light was lit, November 28, 1831. There were 95 wrecks on the island between 1827, just after the families arrived, and 1918, but not one mariner shipwrecked on the island died. The light continued to do its work on the island, augmented by all the lifeboat crews who were stationed there. There was a house next to the building, next to the tower itself. I believe the foundations are still there. I've walked around there many times, and I think I've pretty well figured out where the lifeboat crew lived. And as far as I know, the lifeboat station was active till about 1880, possibly around 1900. But after that, shipwrecks began to decline in frequency because of the light, and also because of the use of the cutting-edge technology of foghorns, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So after about a century or so, the Hichens and Kroll names have disappeared from the list of lightkeepers at this station, but their descendants continue to be in this area and to be in other areas. So the impact that they're settling on the island had is being felt to this day in various ways. As I was telling Mark earlier, I'll take a break after about 3 hours, and we'll have a quick intermission, and I'll wrap up. No, just a bit more. There was so much that I could have said and so much more I could say, but I just want you to get a sense of how important this lighthouse is, not just to me, to everybody, because of the massive role it's played in safety at sea in this area and all of the association with all the people. I don't know what happened to the lifeboat, but I do know it sat on the east side for a long time, and Ronnie Kenny had it brought back. And I believe it was put around a school somewhere, the old school in Clark's Harbor. I don't know if it's still there. Oh, Heritage Center. Okay, so that's a wonderful thing.
I think it's inside.
And I know from talking with people rather, who worked at the station in the 70s and into the 80s, and then I came there in 1989 for the final year, that mariners and fishers were still using that lighthouse, not only for the light and the horn, but for the help the lightkeepers rather, could offer them either through radio assistance or through parts. Even, actually, I remember helping a fisherman out who had exhaust problems with his boat and had so-called gassed himself, carbon monoxide poisoning, and we were able to help him get his boat running again and get him going. So that was in 1989 or 1990. So we were still helpful. Also, I mentioned the foghorn, and that's really important because until radar came in, and until the 70s, and those of you of a certain age will remember, you'd steam so far with a compass and a watch, and you listen. You listen for that blasting grunt, that big brrr. And sometimes the grunt was the only thing you heard. But you aim for that, and then you run a bit longer with your watch and your compass, and then you'd stop and you'd listen again. And that's how my dad remembers getting there. My dad's a bird watcher, 88 years old now, and still loves Seal Island. He remembers that first trip in the late 60s, and that's exactly how they made landing at the east side, listening to that foghorn on the opposite side of the island. So you can imagine how loud that was. This was all part of a stable, long-standing, useful government presence on the island. And Seal Island Light really symbolizes that government presence that we used to really respect. In the current political climate, we tend to want to diss government and government leaders, but in that time, a government institution like a light station, especially in a place like Seal Island, in the middle of nowhere, or at the edge of nowhere, was extremely important. And it was a part of a whole service network of services to mariners that is pretty well gone now. Now I know we've got, I was going to say Loran, that's showing my age. We've got GPS, plotters, electronic chart systems, satellites galore, that's all wonderful stuff, but there's nothing like seeing that light, and if you're close in, hearing that foghorn. And I think this is a big loss right now. So all of this history, I say, combines to make the lighthouse so important as a symbol of safety at sea right here. Then there's the built heritage. Everything from the way the light was built, and how many people here have been inside the tower, up the tower? Oh, okay, you must know people. It's an incredible structure to walk inside. Because of the massive base, and 30 feet doesn't sound like a lot, but once you're inside, it just seems so big. The timbers are huge, there's cross braces, there's mortise and tenon, there's dowels, and it's built like a ship, and at the top, just below the former lantern deck, which is well, still the top of it, there's massive natural growth knees. They're probably about that high and about that deep, and they supported a multi-ton lens and lantern system, which is now down the road at the Seal Island Light Museum, thankfully. It's one of the largest colonial lighthouses left. It's the second oldest wooden lighthouse left in use in North America. The oldest one is Head Harbor, New Brunswick. And the third oldest is Gannett Rock, New Brunswick, which has now been abandoned and is falling down. It's been abandoned for more than 20 years and it is still standing. Gaping holes. The house is still attached. There's a concrete house attached to it. It is still standing. It's still a day mark from shore. These buildings were built to last. Also, when you're in the tower on Seal Island, there's the smell. And certain people who have been in the tower over the years have said, that's the same smell I knew when I was a kid. And it's the smell of kerosene, it's the smell of paint, it's the smell of old earth underneath the foundation, it's the smell of countless years of toil, of lights being carried up and down, lanterns, the work that was done. You walk into that tower and it's like you're transported back 20, 40, 50, 100 years. That's certainly the way when I've been in, when the technicians come out and I happen to be there, I'm in there like you know what on a wool sock, and it's just, the smell is amazing. So it also symbolizes and embodies the history of the island. And there's remnants of shipwrecks all around the island. There's ironwood fittings, there's dead eyes, there's the ironwood would be the lignum vitae, that really hard wood. There's old rudders, there's bits of bronze. So you really get a sense that, yeah, this is a big deal. There's not many islands you can go to that have this much history in one place. This is a very, very special place. However, the federal government doesn't care about the smell of diesel and me getting misty-eyed about the sound of the foghorn, or any of you for that matter. And that's understandable because their job is to provide safe navigation for mariners. However, the government is mandated to maintain this heritage lighthouse. They have said they will not, but they must be held to account, if not for full maintenance, at least partial maintenance, in conjunction with local support. This is very important. Lighthouses, unfortunately, seem to be a bit of a millstone around the federal government's neck, and I don't want to get too negative, but I'm just painting a true picture. And in many cases, they're being replaced with metal towers, and this is what's in mind for Seal Island. And in fact, about a month ago, there were workers from a construction company looking at the site, flew in a helicopter looking for a site to place the new tower. That's all well and good. Let's say we do save Seal Island Light and they put up another tower. A light without a tower without a light, I don't know. I don't know. Seal Island needs to have its light in the tower. It needs to be maintained as it is. It deserves that much. Not every lighthouse can be saved, but if you look up and down the shore, Salvages, Gull Rock, Bliss Islands over New Brunswick, they've left the old towers to fall down, and there's a steel tower next to it with little rectangular day marks, which you cannot see from any distance. Seal Island Lighthouse, you can see for miles and miles and miles, as you know, as a day mark. So lighthouse, also very important as a day mark. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. The National Trust for Canada says, and I quote, "The lighthouse, Seal Island, provides a vivid, even textbook example of the inadequacy of the government's heritage building protection policies. Only 3% of Canadian lighthouses have genuine, full heritage protection." So it's one thing to say, well, it's classified, but that doesn't mean it's going to be saved. Hattie Perry, does anyone know the name Hattie Perry? Local historian of Yore. I'm going to end with her quote instead of something I'm going to make up, because she said it so well. It is impossible to calculate the overwhelming good that was accomplished over the years, and all because of the strong-willed, tender-hearted Mary Hichens, succeeding in persuading her husband Richard and their friends Edmund and Jerusha to move to Seal Island. They stand for sacrifice to self and devotion to service for others. The Hichens and Crolls have left countless descendants both in Canada and abroad, and they have every right to be proud of their heritage. The service rendered might well deserve the immortal accolade expressed so well by the British statesman Sir Winston Churchill, when he said, "Never have so many owed so much to so few." We owe it to ourselves to fight for the Seal Island Lighthouse. It represents what is good. It is a light in the dark. So far, it's still a voice in the fog. It's a centerpiece of the community, even though it's offshore. It's an aid to navigation still in the 21st century, and it's a reminder of where we came from and of the light and the safety that we still need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If anybody wants something to snack on or coffee, tea, there is some over there. Help yourself. Our next speaker, whose father and grandfather were both lightkeepers of the Seal Island Lake, Mr. Mark Fleming.
He's hard I follow. Mine's going to be a little bit shorter, please. One thing I'd like to say right now is I'd like to thank Carl Smith. He come over and I asked him over and I had some questions for him. So I just want that in front right now that he was good enough to come over. And I'm going to actually tell you the questions I asked him. I said, how important are the lightkeepers in the station to you and your family over the years? Which I will get to in a second. That was the first question I asked him. Do you think the light still has meaning in today's world, basically 2024? Do you have any fond memories of the keepers' interaction with? You've got a couple. And do you think the light should be maintained? So I'll start with my brief talk. My name's Mark Fleming, and my connection to Seal Island was my grandfather Brad and my father Earl. They was both keepers on Seal Island for many years, during the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. Grandfather Bradford started in 1951, ended in 1973 due to some medical conditions. My father Earl completed his radio training in Ottawa and started in 1958 as assistant keeper. He stayed on the station until 66, until he moved the arm to Keeper Shoe. In 1972, my grandfather had to leave because he had a stroke. And he insisted my father return to keep his station as it should be kept. I guess after that many years, he took a kind of ownership of the light and the pride to keep it up to his standards. And so I'm told he was very rigorous at that. So, oh, there that goes. Some of the stories I've heard, been told, Western House floors, I guess Grant had them, like the quote is, they've shown you like glass and better than your kitchen table. You'd almost eat off them, I guess, from what I'm told. Another one I was told once, this is from Normally Shan, she said there was a piece of paper flowing across the grounds there once and he had to go out and get it. So that just tells you what kind of station he kept. Where's that here? Okay, that's station at the time. They was always there to lend a hand or help out with the tractor when needed. All the fishermen would come over to the lighthouse for a yarn if they wasn't at lobstering. With conversation with Carl Smith, I asked him the importance of the light stations. And in his words, back in the day, all we had, as Chris said, they had a watch and a compass. Some days he'd lose his way. Sometimes he could always depend on hearing the horn. guiding back to the East Side Cove. I asked him what the light has any meaning to this date, has any relative meaning to this, but, and he responded, sometimes with all the new electronics, might can fail. It's good to have things working on the light. It's good to have backup in the modern age electronics. He also mentioned that, oh, I'll skip to here. He also mentioned that when not out lobstering in the spring of the year, the crew of the guys would go over and watch hockey games at the house. And he had said that that was especially fun. And the old televisions with their avid ears, I guess it was hard to watch, remember? For those who remember the snowy picture, adjusting the antennas constantly. He also said he could remember helping my father, Earl, and my grandfather, Brad, loading the old trailer full of oil barrels and lugging them to the station when they used to resupply in the spring. And he said he could remember Brad would take the tractor for the guys, the cart, to haul loose ballast, because anybody remembers wooden pots, they didn't like to sink. This summer I had a great opportunity to have my first trip back since I was a young fellow, age 4. Shout out to Chris Mills for letting me stay with him at North Home. To that point, to be precise, 1972, when my father returned to take Graham's spot, I know nothing stays the same, to say the least. You can tell I'm a good creative writer. But when you was that age, meaning myself then, everything changes. Even the trip to the light on the tractor. When I was on there this summer, it took me 10 minutes to walk from the east side to the light. When I was a kid, it seemed like it took forever. Can you imagine, back that tractor, that cart they used to have. Remember when they actually rode the stuff ashore, them old trawl dories. So I do remember that stuff. I also take note that I imagine my grandfather and father would now say about the light and surrounding areas of the former station and its disrepair. The historical significance of the light station and its contribution to the fishing and marine industry has been one of great importance to local communities for decades, centuries even. There is a reminder to all who have been on and around the station and brought me to another question to Mr. Smith. Do you think the light should be kept up? The response was quick and fast. There should be some sort of work being completed on a scheduled basis. It is easier to paint or repair a shingle every couple of years than letting it sit for 10 to 12 years. I think the last actual work that was on it was 2013. Somebody please correct me if they know.
You're right.
Imagine your home going that long and not doing nothing with it. What would you, gonna mess with your head. I, being Mr. Smith, says the light is still in reasonable condition, and I could see if it was totally gone and rotten, and make a move to do something else. That would make sense, meaning if it was all rotted out, yes. But as Chris stated before, and what I've seen this summer, is still in reasonably good shape. It just needs a little TLC. But there's no need for that, I guess. That's what they're basically telling you. Now, my personal thoughts are as follows. I believe the light itself should be maintained. This is supposed to be done by Real Properties or the Heritage Society. I'm not 100% sure which one, but I know Heritage has a lot to do with it. Or it's going to have to be a public interest group to keep things up. In my way of thinking, the collaboration of public and private initiative can keep the light afloat, which can be accomplished. I've seen firsthand the light, other than a few facial features, some flashing in the structures seems to be in very good condition. But that being said, the more years of neglect will take a toll, to say the least. To all this, I say I'm all in. Anybody wants me to speak, I'll speak, do best, or whatever I have to do. I'm all in. Save the light. I realize the attempts have been made to get work done. It seems to fall on deaf ears, or should I say burnt letters, or deleted emails. there is a way a collective group can get this achieved. I believe at this point, there is a way I can participate, and we as members of the community can get it done. It's well worth the aggravation to talking to the people you have to talk to, because after a while, they do have to listen. In closing, I believe that there is a way to get this accomplished and save history from being ruined. Man, we got a lot of history there. And it was one of the proudest trips I had this summer, was getting back on there, being this tall. Now I'm getting around. It was a good trip, best of kind, and I plan on going to make 2 trips back next year with a little luck. Anyway, still standing. Okay, as Chris said, it was lit in 1831. This structure is still structurally sound to this day. It makes no sense of replacing it with a steel tower as a cost saving. If this is promoted right and the right factors in hand, this will be accomplished. From this day forward, like I said, I'm all in. Anybody wants me to join anything, I'm there. And we'll give voice to whomever wants to hear it. Public awareness is the key, and we can get this done. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you, Mark. The next speaker is Carol Cuttrow, who's dove around the islands to many shipwrecks, and she'll tell you a few stories on that. Carol?
The good stuff. So good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Usually I'm noted for being quite loud, so you should be able to hear me. My name is Carl Cuttrow, and I'm from Cape Sable Island. I'm here to talk not really about the lighthouse, but I guess what happens when you don't have lighthouses, shipwrecks. The first one, first of all, I'd like to say it's a passion of mine to be doing, to be able to go diving on these shipwrecks, because it's just like diving in them, opening the door to a museum that nobody's ever been into, and it's just unbelievable the things that you'll see and find, and the history, and then you go home and you do the research and you learn all about it, and then it gets personal. Before I get too far, yes, I dove on the wrecks, but it's a team effort. It's not a simple thing, just jump aboard a boat and go dive on a wreck. I mean, most of the wrecks that we've dove have been 100, 120 feet, 90 feet. The tide, you need a proper team. I mean, Maxie Kenny, Donnie Mahaney, Winston Atkinson. I mean, it takes a team of 5 or 6 people just to go get 25 minutes on bottom, and it's worth every cent and every minute that we put in it. So the first wreck that I would like to talk about is, of course, the Blonde, which is what Blonde Rock is known for. The Blonde was a French frigate, La Blonde, and was seized during the War of 1776, the War of Independence between the United States and Britain, and renamed the Blonde. And she was coming back from a raid in, I believe it was, in the Chesapeake, their capital at the time. Raleigh, I think it was, but anyhow. And she had a privateer in tow, and it was a heavy fog and a big sea rolling, and she ended up on Blonde Rock, and they were able to get off the Blonde and get on the, I can't remember what the name of the privateering vessel was. But they were able to get on the towed vessel and get on to Cape Island, on to Seal Island, sorry. And from there, they spent a few days, and then Scammell and the Lively, which were two privateers from the Americas, came to Seal Island to gather up some supplies and some fresh water. And they realized that there was a whole regiment of British soldiers on the island. And at that point, they were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because they were on land, and here was a regiment of several hundred well-armed men. So a deal was made to truck or boat to bring the British soldiers and the crews to Yarmouth in exchange for them to be allowed to get on their way and whatnot. So anyhow, that's what took place, but I think there was one condition to it, if I remember correctly, that all of the British soldiers had to throw their cutlasses and rifles at the time, which would have been flintlocks, into Brig Pond. And so anyhow, that was part of the deal. So they brought them to Yarmouth, and the Scammell and the Lively went back home, and I believe that they got chastised by the authorities of the day back in Massachusetts, and eventually I think both captains ended up on Cape Island, and that's where they resided. The second wreck that I would like to mention is the Essay. Now the Essay was a large steam vessel, 450 feet long, 5,500 ton, twin screw, and she ran up on Blonde Rock. And oh, I forgot to mention, I think on the Blonde, I think there was only one loss of life. And so the Essay ran up on the rock, on Blonde Rock, and being a pinnacle, like there's no support on the outside of the rock, so she shored up on the rock. And generally what happens to a steel vessel is the weight of the vessel punctures a hole into the hull of the ship. Then with the hole and the ship being upright onto the rock, the water runs down into the bottom of the ship, into the stern of the ship. And in response to that, all of the air rushes to the bow of the ship, making the ship light in the bow. So within a matter of an hour or two, most of the time, the steel ship, would float off of the rock and head for bottom, because it was heavy. So you had to, when you got on a steel vessel and you got on a pinnacle rock like that, you had very little time to get out. You had to get out, or else you were going on bottom with it. So so we found the Essay. Maxie Kenny and his father used to fish around it. They used to lose gear and all kinds of that. And I'm sure a few of the Bradford Simmons probably fished in that area too. Probably has gear on it too. And so we dove on the wreck. We found a wreck, and kind of a comical thing. What happened? Buster Link was with us. I'm sure most people in this room remember late great Buster. And so we look for the wrecks with an underwater camera. So Buster and I had a bet that we weren't going to find the wreck. So we were using what equipment that was available to us. We have seafloor mappers and the likes of that aboard the boat. So we seen this abrupt rise on the, and Buster said, I bet you that's one of the boilers. So we were just laughing about it, like just a joke. So we dropped the camera overboard. Lo and behold, there they were. Boilers, 40 feet long, 22 feet across the face of them, 3 of them. So never had that much luck finding a wreck. Usually it takes days, weeks, months to find a wreck. So anyhow, Donnie Mahaney was with us, Winston, Maxie, and myself. So we dove the wreck, and we, of course, had forgotten we had a large anchor that we used to use to anchor the outboard. So what we do, we take the lobster boat, and behind the lobster boat we tow a small 16-foot outboard. So we'll do all of our work on the fishing vessel, and then when we find what we're looking for, we'll put a large anchor and anchor the small boat. So we had, of course, forgot the large anchor, so we had two small anchors. So again, Buster and I had a bet, and I said, Buster, I bet you I can put that anchor on top of those boilers. Buster said you couldn't hit that in 1,000 years. So anyhow, we threw the anchors overboard, and Maxie got in the outboard, and what he would do, he'd wait till the tide was slack. You can only dive on a slack water when the tide's not running. So what Maxie would do, he'd wait for the tide to slack, and then he'd haul all of the slack from the anchor to the small boat. So instead of having to go on an angle to the wreck, it would pretty much be straight up and down. So Winston, my father-in-law, would take the lobster boat and just go at the bow, just take the boat and go around the bow of the small boat, and we'd jump overboard, grab a hold of the line, and go down. So as we were going down, Donnie and I were going down the line, and it was still some angle to it. So we were going down, and you could see the wreckage everywhere underneath of us. There was beams and plates and spars and just amazing, the wreckage. And couldn't figure out why we weren't getting to the wreck. So we got to the end of the line, and we dropped off of the line, right in front of the boilers, and I tapped Donnie on the shoulder and I said, look out. And on the top of the boilers was the anchor. Keep the tolerant on top of the boiler, so I won that bet. So the essay, from what we've seen, was, I mean, you're trying to make heads or tails of what happened, and you know how this became to be what it is. And we swam, you know, you try to get, I mean, it's 450 feet long, plus you know, the debris that it's, and I mean, it's a long ways. You can't swim the entire length. So you try to get kind of your bearings on where you're at. And so we were on the superstructure, and just after that was the big boiler. Those boilers were immense. So as we started working our way towards the stern, we found the engine, the steam engine, which was on about a 15-degree list. Great big cylinders, like it was pretty amazing, the stuff. And so we started finding some pieces of shaft. Now the shaft pieces are 30 feet long, 16 inches around of solid steel. So this isn't small stuff. And then where so they could only handle 30, they were in 30-foot sections. So there's probably 8 or 10 sections down there. And the flange, which is the part that you would bolt both shaft sections together, the bolts were still there in the bolt holes. The bolts were about 4 inches around. And they were all bent where they had come apart. So we're looking at this and the force that it would take to do that. Like we're just in awe at what we're seeing. Like, I mean, we've dove on other wrecks, and most of the time the shafts are intact. The wheel is standing there, you know what I mean? Steel wheels standing there scratching the debris off to see if it's brass. So anyhow, we never did find the wheels. And when we came back, we dove on her, I think 3 times, Maxie. So when we came back, we figured that it was a true, you know, of how the description that I was telling you about how the pinnacle rock and the wreck floats off. And the only thing that we could figure out was, she came off of Blonde Rock while the tide was going hard. And she probably floated mid-water because she's 10 miles due south of Seal Island, so it's a long ways. So, so the only thing that we could figure out was that the tide there goes at 4 knots, and she was going stern first, and when she fetched up in the bottom, the force of that, 5,500 ton ship, the weight and the force of that ship coming on bottom at 4 knots was just incredible. It just tumbled everything. We come to the conclusion that the wheels are under the ship because she hit stern first. And I can remember I was sitting on top of the engine, and the engine's probably 20 feet tall, 15, 20 feet. And I'm looking down like this, and all you see is just I-beam, 40, 50 feet long, 16-inch square. I mean, it's just a pile, and you kind of get a sense in your mind of what happened. It's just incredible. So then there's the Girona. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Girona. Girona, of all things, struck the SA, coming from Boston, another iron steamship, which I'm sure added to the destruction of the SA, all of the damage that we're seeing, but would have had nothing to do with the shafts and the lower part of the ship. And she sunk, she floated off, and of course punctured the hull. So she floated midway in the bay and lost the bay. And I didn't dive on her myself, but Donnie Mahaney and Gary Thurber were the two that were diving on her. And so they got everybody off of her. I think that's one they called a horse wreck, wasn't it, actually? So a lot of horses and cattle. So a lot of the horses and the cattle ended up on Shag Harbor. So probably some local folklore there, like I'm sure you've heard of the Girona. And then another one that we dove on was the Para. The Para was a 700-ton steamship, 90 feet of water. She was loaded with flour. So the thing about those days was, I tell this to everybody, there was no planes, trains, and automobiles. Everything traveled on ships. Everything. You bought an apple from the Annapolis Valley, it came on a schooner. If you bought, doesn't matter what it is, manufactured goods, it came from England, everything was on a ship. Even the money kind of traveled on a ship. The last one that I want to speak of is the Staffordshire. This is my pride and joy, this one. That's a painting, I don't know if everybody can see it or not, but that's a painting of the Staffordshire that John Smith painted for me in 2005. She would have been 198 feet from the water line to the top of the topmast. So just a massive vessel, 243 feet long, 43 feet wide, 1,900 ton. So that one was an earlier wreck. Oh, and I have a dish, if you want to hand it around, Maxie. That dish comes off of the Staffordshire, and you can see some of the incrustation that's on it. Please be gentle, because it's it's been on bottom for almost 200 years. So the Staffordshire was a packet ship, packet meaning more or less a ferry back and forth from Boston to Liverpool. So she was pretty scheduled back and forth. And so she loaded from, I think it was November 7th to December 9th. She was in Liverpool, England. And the reason why she was called a Staffordshire, her purpose, she was built specifically to ship Staffordshire pottery from Staffordshire, England, which was used, utilitarian product that was used in Boston, New York, in those